The first rain of summer came not as a storm but as a slow, wavering sigh from the sky, softening the cracked earth of Larkspur Crossing. Dust turned to clay beneath worn boots, and the air filled with the scent of wet sage and cedar smoke curling from distant chimneys. Thunder grumbled far beyond the red cliffs, a reminder that even the heavens could long for release. The rain fell in silver threads, gathering in puddles that reflected the ghosted shapes of mesquite trees and aging rooftops. It touched everything: roofs, wagon wheels, abandoned bird nests, like a memory too gentle to fade. On the edge of town, where the grass grew taller than the fences and the land breathed with quiet sorrow, Talon Greyhawk stood at his forge. His broad frame was lit by the orange glow of the furnace, rain glistening over his scarred, sun-darkened skin. Sparks flew in rhythm to the hammer in his hand, each strike echoing like a heartbeat that refused to quicken. At 45, he moved with the solemn grace of stone shaped by years of wind. The town saw only his silence, his Apache blood, his solitude. They whispered that he was too old to change, too old to love, too far removed from the world they claimed as theirs. From the road came the distant creak of carriage wheels, a sound that wove itself through the rainfall like a thread of fate. Evelyn Hart stepped down from the coach, boots sinking into the mud. She held a faded parasol against the drizzle, though it did little to protect her from the cold. At 23, she was neither girl nor fully woman in the eyes of the town, caught somewhere between who she once was and who she refused to become. Her hair clung damp to her temples, and in her gaze rested a quiet sadness. Not the kind born from tragedy, but from the gentler cruelty of being forgotten. Eyes followed her from behind rain-fogged windows. Some with pity, some with curiosity, others with scorn. They remembered her as the girl left waiting at the altar of a man who never returned, as though heartbreak were a crime one must pay penance for. Still, she walked forward, back straight despite the weight of old whispers clinging to her hem like burrs. The wind shifted, tugging sharply at her parasol until the metal ribs bent with a sharp crack. She stood still for a heartbeat, the rain now spilling over her shoulders, plastering her dress to her skin. Then, from the shadows of the forge, Talon stepped forward. He didn't speak. Instead, he lifted a weather-worn leather cloak and held it above them both. The gesture was simple, wordless, but it held the weight of something sacred. Evelyn looked up, eyes meeting his. Not recognition but a quiet understanding. Two storms halted in their tracks, listening. "You don't need to," she whispered. Talon said nothing. His cloak remained raised, steady despite the rain. She hesitated only a moment, then stepped beneath its shelter. For a while neither of them moved. The forge hissed softly as raindrops kissed the iron. A magpie called from the hitching post. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell told the hour, slow and sonorous. When the rain eased, Evelyn offered a soft thank you, her voice barely more than breath. Talon gave a brief nod, stepped back into the glow of his furnace and returned to his work. But his hammer struck slower now, as though something in him had paused. Evelyn walked on, past the general store, past the saloon with its warped wooden porch where tired men sat playing cards. Every glance that met her carried the same silent question. Why had she returned? She ignored them all until she reached the small house left to her after her father's passing. The garden was choked with weeds, the windows clouded with dust. Still, she opened the door and stepped inside, rainwater trailing behind her like a second shadow. Night brought a hush over the town. The rain became a steady lullaby, tapping against shutters and rooftops. In the forge, Talon sat by the dimming embers, hands resting on his knees. He stared at the cloak drying by the fire, its edges darkened from years of wear. Once, he had used it to shield his younger brother from a hailstorm in the White River Valley. That brother was gone now, buried beneath foreign soil. The memories pressed against his chest like an old bruise. He whispered to the flames, not expecting an answer. "I am too old for such things." Morning returned with mist draped over the fields. Evelyn stood outside the mercantile, speaking with the owner about work. She was offered a place behind the counter, sorting ledgers and sewing sacks. It was humble, but it was something. When she left with her apron folded under her arm, she saw Talon across the muddy street, loading coal into a cart. He glanced up briefly, then looked away. Yet his hands slowed as though waiting for her to speak. She didn't. Days passed, as gentle and heavy as rain-soaked blankets. Evelyn mended torn cloth, arranged jars of penny candy, and swept the worn wooden floors of the store. Each evening she found some small thing in need of repair. A cracked metal clasp, a bent lantern hook, a rusted hinge. She brought these to Talon's forge, offering a coin she could scarcely afford. He always took it, though his fingers brushed hers only briefly. They never exchanged more than a few words. Yet with every visit, something unseen took root, like green shoots beneath the soil. But the town noticed. Towns always did. Whispers rose like smoke. She's seeking solace in savage arms. He'll break her like iron under hammer. Doesn't she remember what he is? Evelyn heard these words as she walked home, her heartbeat steady but her hands trembling once she closed her door. She leaned against the wall and let the tears come, not for herself, but for the injustice of cruelty dressed as concern. One evening as storm clouds gathered once again, she left the store later than usual. The streets were nearly empty, lanterns glowing pale in the mist. Outside the church, she paused beneath the eaves and listened to the rain beginning its descent. Footsteps approached. Talon emerged from the fog carrying a bundle of firewood. He was drenched already, hair clinging to his brow. Evelyn stepped from the shelter without thinking, rain cascading over her. "They're wrong about you," she said quietly, voice trembling. "They don't see what I see." Talon's jaw tightened. For a moment, it seemed he might walk away. Instead, he set the firewood down carefully and met her gaze. In his dark eyes there was no anger, only sorrow, deep and unspoken. "I don't need their acceptance," he said at last. His voice was low, roughened by years of silence. "But you should not stand in the rain for me." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Thunder rumbled overhead. The rain thickened, drumming against the church roof like 1,000 unspoken confessions. And there, beneath the storm, something shifted. The quiet space between them filled not with fear, but with possibility. Neither noticed the shadow watching from a nearby window, marking the beginning of a storm far greater than the one falling from the sky. The rain did not stop for 3 days. It came in long, unbroken sheets that swallowed the horizon and turned the streets of Larkspur Crossing into narrow rivers of mud. Horses stood under dripping awnings, heads bowed. The townsfolk grumbled about lost work and spoiled grain, but to Evelyn, the rain had begun to feel like company. It softened everything it touched, even sorrow. Every droplet carried the faint scent of iron from the forge across the road, a scent she had come to recognize before she could name it. From the mercantile window, she could see Talon working through the storm, sleeves rolled, the muscles in his arms taut beneath the rhythm of the hammer. He didn't seem to notice the weather, nor the glances cast his way. To Evelyn, he looked like someone who had learned to live inside silence, who had made peace with being unseen. And yet, somehow, she had started to see him everywhere, in the shape of the hills, the steady line of the horizon, the quiet endurance of the rain itself. One evening, after the downpour had settled into a drizzle, she crossed the road to bring him a pot of stew. He had eaten little the day before. She'd heard it from the widow Winslow, who never failed to remind her that some men don't need fussing over, dear. Evelyn ignored her, holding the tin pot carefully as she stepped into the warmth of the forge. Talon looked up. The fire threw a flicker of gold across his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. She hesitated. "I brought supper." He wiped his hands on a cloth, his expression unreadable. "You don't owe me kindness." "It isn't debt," she said, setting the pot near the fire. "It's supper." For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the forge. The steam from the stew mingled with the scent of coal and rain-damp earth. Talon finally nodded once, almost shyly, and poured 2 bowls. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something sacred in their quiet, as though words might cheapen what lingered between them. When she stood to leave, Talon spoke again, his voice deep and careful. "You shouldn't listen to them." She turned back. "To who?" "The town." His eyes met hers, and the weight of years seemed to sit behind them. "They break what they fear. They have done it before." Evelyn swallowed. "And what do they fear?" He looked down at his hands, the scars, the strength, the history etched into the skin. "What cannot be tamed?" Her heart faltered. "And you think that's you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know it is." The next morning, the rain stopped, leaving the world rinsed clean but heavy with the smell of wet soil. The sunlight broke through in shy fragments, spilling gold across the rooftops. It should have felt like peace, but Larkspur Crossing was restless. Rumors had found new shape in the dry light of morning. They said Evelyn had been seen entering the Apache's forge. They said she stayed too long. They said she'd lost what little dignity she'd managed to rebuild. Mrs. Winslow spoke loudest at the church steps, her words sharp as glass. "A woman who lets herself be seen with his kind can't expect much respect." Evelyn stood nearby, basket of apples in her arms, her face pale but her spine straight. "You speak of kindness as though it's a sin," she said quietly. The older woman bristled. And you speak of shame like you've never earned it. Every head turned. Evelyn's cheeks burned, but she didn't look away. Instead, she lifted her chin, gathered her things, and walked off, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The sound of rain echoed faintly in her mind, though the sky was clear now. She didn't see Talon that day, though his forge burned late into the night. When she finally went to him the following evening, he was shaping the rim of a horseshoe, sweat beading down his temple. He looked up as she approached but didn't stop working. "They talk," she said simply. He nodded once. "They always will. I don't want you to think." He interrupted, voice steady but softer now. "You don't need to protect me, Evelyn Hart." She stepped closer, near enough to feel the heat of the forge on her skin. "Maybe I'm not trying to protect you." His hammer paused midair. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then he lowered the tool, eyes fixed on hers. "You're too young for this. And you're too proud to see what's in front of you." The words fell between them like embers, hot, dangerous, alive. He said nothing more. When she turned to leave, he didn't stop her, but his gaze followed her all the way down the street. The following week, the town's unease grew heavier. A group of strangers had been spotted near the canyon. Outlaws, men with no loyalty but to fire and greed. Sheriff Reddick called for watchmen, but few volunteered. Still, every conversation found its way back to Talon. It was easier to blame the outsider. Easier to think the rain and the unrest were both his doing. When the church bell rang late one evening, Evelyn knew before anyone spoke. The mercantile had been broken into, supplies gone, coin missing. The men who gathered in the square didn't ask questions. They made accusations. "It's him," someone said. "The Apache." Talon was brought from his forge, his wrists still black with soot. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The crowd pressed close, shouting. Evelyn forced her way through until she stood before him, breathless. "This is madness," she cried. "You have no proof." A man spat on the ground. "And what are you defending him for, girl? He's not one of us." "Maybe that's why he's better than you," she snapped. The words silenced them briefly. Talon's eyes met hers, unreadable. There was something in them, gratitude perhaps, or warning. Sheriff Reddick hesitated, looking at the angry faces around him. "We'll sort this out in the morning," he muttered. "For now, let him be." But by morning Talon was gone. His forge stood empty, embers cold. Evelyn found him by instinct, following the faint trail of hoofprints leading toward the cliffs. The sun had just begun to rise, washing the canyon in pink light. She called his name once, twice, and finally saw him, alone, sitting beside the river, his horse grazing nearby. "You shouldn't have come," he said without turning. "You shouldn't have left," she replied, breathless from the climb. He stared at the water, its surface rippling with morning wind. "I've seen this before. Fear wears many faces, but it speaks the same words. The next storm won't be rain, it will be fire." She came closer, kneeling beside him. "You didn't do what they said." He looked at her then, eyes shadowed but alive. "You already knew that." "I did." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with everything neither could say. Talon's voice broke it at last. "When I was younger, I thought love was a fire that burned through everything. But time teaches you different. Love isn't fire, it's ash. It clings even when the flame is gone." She reached out, touched his hand, rough and warm beneath her fingers. "Maybe it can be both." For the first time he didn't pull away. They sat there as the river moved past, carrying sunlight in its ripples. The wind smelled of wet cedar and smoke from the town below. Evelyn felt the moment fold around them, fragile, fleeting, but real. When they returned, the air in Larkspur Crossing had turned sharp with tension. Smoke rose in thin ribbons from the west fields. Word had spread. The outlaws were close. But what stirred louder than fear was guilt. Mrs. Winslow wouldn't meet Evelyn's eyes. The sheriff avoided Talon altogether. The forge was rebuilt that evening, not out of forgiveness but necessity. Evelyn stayed until the last ember glowed. When she turned to leave, he spoke her name for the first time. "Evelyn." She froze. His tone was quiet but certain. "You are not like them." She looked back, rain beginning to fall again in faint silver drops. "Neither are you." The world narrowed to the sound of the forge breathing behind him, the rain whispering between them, and the ache of something unnamed pressing at the edge of her heart. The following day the Ridgeback Riders came. 6 men on horses dark as the storm behind them, faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. They didn't shoot. Not yet. They only rode through the main street, slow and smiling like men who'd already won. Talon watched from the doorway of his forge, hammer in hand. Evelyn stood beside the church, eyes on him. Between them the rain began again, steady, unrelenting. And as the outlaws vanished into the distance, a single thought crossed her mind, sharp as lightning. The storm he had warned her about was not coming. It had already begun. The sky hung low and bruised, heavy with clouds that promised more rain. Larkspur Crossing stood still beneath it. Windows shuttered, streets slick with last night's storm. The world seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something to give. In that stillness, Talon Greyhawk worked alone at his forge, the steady clang of his hammer the only sound brave enough to disturb the silence. Sparks rose like fireflies before dying against the damp air. Each strike carried a rhythm of restraint. He worked not for coin now but for calm. The town's eyes had turned colder since the night of the break-in. Every passing glance felt like a question unasked, an accusation left hanging. Yet Talon endured it as he always had, quietly. He had learned long ago that silence could protect as well as punish. Evelyn watched from across the street through the mercantile's rain-streaked glass. Her fingers stilled on the counter, unable to complete the tally before her. The sound of his hammer reached her in waves, steady and stubborn, each note striking something deep inside her chest. She envied that kind of stillness, that capacity to bear the world's judgment without breaking. But she also feared it. Silence, she had learned, could bury a heart as surely as shame. When the noon bell rang, she stepped outside. The wind had turned cold, carrying whispers from the saloon where men gathered to talk of outlaws, vengeance, and God's supposed order. Their words crawled like locusts, devouring truth in their hunger for blame. She heard her name once, twice, and felt the burn of it along her spine. Still she crossed the street. Talon didn't look up as she approached. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, voice steady, low as thunder before it breaks. "I'm here because you won't come to me." He paused mid-strike. The forge hissed. "You know what they're saying." "Yes," she said softly, stepping closer. "But I also know they're wrong." He set the hammer down, the sound echoing in the rain-damp air. "That doesn't matter. Their words are heavier than truth." "Then let them drown in them," she said, surprising even herself. "We don't have to live under their weight." He looked at her, then really looked, at the defiance trembling in her voice, the courage she'd built from heartbreak and humiliation. His gaze softened, but the distance in him remained. "You don't understand," he said finally. "A man like me doesn't get to walk free of what he is." Evelyn shook her head. "Then maybe it's time someone proved them wrong." The moment held, fragile and electric, until the sound of hooves broke it. 2 riders galloped into town, mud spraying from the horses' flanks. The sheriff trailed them, breathless. "The Ridgeback riders hit the ranch outside town," he shouted. "Took everything. Killed the hand who tried to stop them." A murmur rippled through the street. Eyes turned, not toward the sheriff but toward Talon. Evelyn felt the shift like a physical blow. "He warned us," someone muttered. "Maybe he knew." The sheriff's mouth tightened. "Now hold on." But the crowd had begun to form, drawn by suspicion and fear. A hand pointed. "Ask him where he was last night." Talon's jaw flexed, though he kept his calm. "I was here," he said evenly. "Ask the blacksmith's apprentice." "He left early yesterday," another voice countered. "No one saw you after sundown." The words piled atop each other, weight upon weight, until reason itself sank beneath them. Evelyn stepped forward, rain collecting in her lashes. "He had nothing to do with it." Someone spat near her boots. "You would say that." The sheriff tried again to speak, but the mob had already chosen its truth. A rope was fetched. Talon didn't resist when rough hands seized him. His silence was not surrender, it was something older, deeper. The quiet of a man who had seen this before. He met Evelyn's gaze once as they dragged him toward the gallows pole by the church. In that single glance lived everything he couldn't say, that she shouldn't follow, that this was the way of the world, that he had stopped expecting fairness long ago. But she did follow. She could not. Her heart pounded against the cold rain as she pushed through the gathering crowd. "Stop!" she cried, voice breaking. "Stop this madness." Sheriff Reddick's hands trembled. "Evelyn, do something." He looked at her, shame flooding his weathered face. "They won't listen." "Then listen to me," she screamed, turning to the crowd. "You're afraid of ghosts you made yourselves? He's the only one who's done a thing worth respect in this town." The murmurs faltered. Some turned their eyes away. But the rope was already looped over the beam. Talon stood tall, rain soaking his hair, dripping from his lashes. His calm unnerved them. "Let him speak." Evelyn demanded. If you have any decency left, let him speak. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. Talon's voice carried through the storm. Once, he said, I believed that silence could keep peace. That if I bowed my head, the world might forget the color of my skin, the blood in my veins. I was wrong. Silence only feeds the fire. He turned to Evelyn. You don't owe me defense. I'm too old for it. Her throat tightened. And I'm too tired of watching people die because others won't listen. The sheriff swallowed, wiping rain from his eyes. Enough, he whispered and cut the rope loose. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring like thunder fading into the hills. No one apologized. No one looked back. Evelyn stood beside Talon as the rain lightened. They'll try again, she said. I know. Then let me help you. He shook his head. You already have. She wanted to argue, but his expression stilled her. He was weary in a way that no rest could fix. The kind of weariness born of being misunderstood too many times for too many years. He turned from her and began to walk toward the canyon road. She followed without permission, boots sinking into the mud. They walked in silence until the town disappeared behind them, replaced by open land and low-hanging mist. By the river he finally stopped. The water ran high from the storms, silver and restless. He crouched by its edge, washing soot from his hands, watching the black water swirl. When I was a boy, he said, my father told me the river remembers everything that touches it. Pain, joy, blood. All of it carried somewhere beyond reach. And what happens to it then? It forgets. He stood, water dripping from his fingers. That's what peace looks like. Evelyn stepped closer. Peace isn't forgetting. It's choosing to keep going even when you remember. He turned toward her, studying her face. There was no fear in her eyes now, only an aching steadiness. You think love can survive this place? He asked quietly. I think it's the only thing that ever does. The air between them thickened with everything left unsaid. A single drop of rain landed on her cheek, sliding down like a tear. Talon reached out, brushing it away with the back of his finger. His touch was light, reverent, as though afraid she might vanish if he lingered. She didn't move. Then, from the distance, a sound shattered the stillness, a gunshot followed by another. Echoes rolled across the valley like thunder chasing lightning. Both turned toward the town. Smoke was already rising from the west end, black against the gray sky. Talon's expression hardened. It's them? Evelyn's pulse quickened. The outlaws? He nodded once. The Ridgeback Riders. For a heartbeat neither spoke. The wind carried the faint cry of a woman from the direction of the church. Evelyn reached for his arm. Talon. He met her eyes, and in his gaze was something both fierce and final. Stay here, he said, voice low, resolute. You've already risked enough. Before she could answer, he mounted his horse, the rain breaking fully now, pelting the earth like shrapnel. She shouted after him, but the storm swallowed her voice. And as his silhouette vanished into the sheets of rain, Evelyn felt the first true fear of her life, not of loss, but of the silence that would follow if he didn't return. The rain came again before dawn, fierce and unrelenting, sweeping across the valley like a living thing. The horizon vanished behind a curtain of gray, and lightning stitched the clouds together with quick, blinding light. In the distance, gunfire cracked, sharp, hollow, too close to mistake for thunder. The Ridgeback Riders had come for Larkspur Crossing. Evelyn stood on her porch, rain slicking her hair against her face, her heart hammering in her chest. Every flash of lightning illuminated the rooftops, the church steeple, the faint glow of fire kindling at the town's edge. She saw men running with rifles, heard horses shrieking in panic. But her eyes searched only for him, for the dark silhouette that had vanished into the storm the night before. Talon Greyhawk rode into the chaos at first light, his black mare cutting through the flooded street like a shadow with purpose. Rain clung to his bare shoulders, tracing the ridges of muscle and scar. He moved like a man unafraid to die, the calm in his face deeper than fear. His spear, an old iron relic he had reforged from his warrior days, gleamed each time lightning split the sky. Around him, townsfolk scrambled, some firing blindly, others praying. He saw the riders first, 6 figures fanning out from the ridge, rifles raised, laughter echoing through the rain. The leader, a gaunt man with a red scarf, rode at the center. His grin was the color of hunger. Didn't think the ghost town had any fight left, he shouted, his voice carrying above the storm. Talon dismounted, stepping into the street. You're right, he said evenly, voice low, deadly calm. But I do. The outlaw laughed, spurring his horse forward. Gunfire burst like firecrackers. Talon dove aside, rolled through the mud and struck. The spear found the horse's flank, the outlaw tumbling to the ground. The others drew up short, startled by the speed, by the precision. Evelyn saw it all from the church steps, where she had gathered the children. She pressed trembling hands to the doors, her pulse keeping time with the thunder. The sheriff was shouting orders, his rifle trembling in his hands. Behind him, Mrs. Winslow clutched her rosary, muttering prayers that dissolved in the rain. Talon faced 3 riders at once now. The world had shrunk to mud and water, to breath and movement. He fought not like a man seeking glory but like one protecting something sacred. His body remembered what his heart had long buried, the rhythm of survival, the silent language of battle. But he was outnumbered and he knew it. A bullet grazed his arm. Another struck the ground near his feet, spraying mud. He stumbled, caught himself, and pressed forward, the spear sweeping in a wide arc that caught one rider across the chest. The man fell with a cry swallowed by the storm. The others hesitated. In that heartbeat of stillness, Talon raised his head. His eyes met Evelyn's across the distance, steady, unyielding. And then the church roof exploded into flame. Lightning had found it, the wooden spire now ablaze, orange tongues curling upward through the downpour. Screams erupted as smoke poured from the rafters. Evelyn turned, saw the fire spreading, felt the searing breath of it against her face. Behind her, children sobbed. She didn't think. She ran inside. "Talon!" she screamed, voice raw, though she couldn't tell if he heard her. Inside, the air burned. She tore at the benches, pushed fallen beams aside, her lungs choking on smoke. Her skirts caught on splinters, tearing as she climbed toward the choir loft where 2 small boys clung to the rail. "Come!" she coughed, wrapping one in her arms, guiding the other with her free hand. The flames roared louder, wood cracking overhead. Talon saw her then, silhouetted against the light, the church behind her a blazing cage. The last outlaw raised his gun toward her, laughter breaking through the rain. Talon moved without thought. The shot rang out, tearing through the storm, but he was already in motion. He struck the rider hard, wrestled the gun away and fired back. The man fell instantly, mud splashing his lifeless face. Smoke filled the street now, a ghostly shroud of orange and gray. Talon threw down his weapon and sprinted toward the church, his boots sinking into the flooded ground. The heat hit him before he reached the steps. The sheriff shouted something, maybe to stop, maybe to help, but he didn't hear. He plunged into the inferno. Evelyn turned at the sound of his voice, relief and terror crashing through her in the same breath. The roof groaned above them, sparks raining down. "Go!" he ordered, grabbing the children, thrusting them toward the door. She followed, stumbling, coughing, blinded by smoke. A beam fell, striking her shoulder. She cried out, collapsing. Talon caught her before she hit the ground. "Hold on," he said, voice rough but steady. He lifted her, her weight light against him, and pushed through the fire. His back burned, his breath shallow. Each step was a battle against collapse, but he didn't slow. When they burst into the rain again, the crowd surged forward, hands reaching to help. The church collapsed behind them, a roar like the end of the world. Evelyn coughed violently, struggling to breathe. Talon laid her down gently beneath the overhang of the saloon porch. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment the world went still, the rain, the shouting, all fading into nothing but the sight of him kneeling beside her, soaked, blood running from his arm. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," he said, though his voice trembled now. The exhaustion in him ran deep, beyond the wound, beyond the night. The sheriff knelt beside them, guilt carved into his weathered face. "You saved them," he murmured. Talon looked at him, rain dripping from his chin. "No," he said quietly. "She did." Evelyn tried to smile, but tears mixed with rain, streaking her soot-stained cheeks. Around them, the townsfolk began to gather. Their eyes were different now, not cold, not distant. Shame had a way of softening even the hardest faces. Mrs. Winslow sank to her knees nearby, clutching her rosary not for prayer, but for apology. When dawn finally broke, it came pale and trembling, as though the sun itself had been afraid to return. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only smoke and ash. The church was gone, the street torn and blackened, but the people of Larkspur Crossing were alive. Talon stood apart from them at the edge of the ruins. His body ached, his bandaged arm stiff beneath the drying blood. The rain had stopped, but its scent lingered, iron, cedar, and smoke. He watched as Evelyn helped the children to safety, her movements slow but steady. When she turned to find him, he was already saddling his horse. "You're leaving," she said softly, stepping closer. He didn't look at her. The land doesn't forgive men like me. It remembers too much. Then let it forgive us together. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held firm. Stay. He met her gaze, something breaking open in his chest. You don't understand. My presence here, it divides you from them. They divided themselves, she said. I'm done letting them tell me who I'm allowed to stand beside. For a long moment neither spoke. The morning wind carried the scent of rain and smoke, a mingling of endings and beginnings. He reached for her hand, rough palm against soft fingers, and for the first time he didn't pull away. Around them the town began to rebuild. The sheriff organized men to gather timber. The widow Winslow offered food to the children she once scorned. Change moved slowly, like light creeping back into a long-abandoned room, but it came all the same. Evelyn and Talon rebuilt the forge together. The first day she helped lift the iron frame, her dress torn, her arms smudged with soot. He showed her how to hold the tongs steady, how to listen for the breath of the flame. Their movements found rhythm, their silences ease. Sometimes he would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, at the curve of her smile, the quiet determination in her face, and the ache that had lived inside him for years began to ease. When the last beam was set in place, rain began again, light this time, soft as memory. Evelyn stepped outside, tilting her face to the sky. It never ends, she said. Talon joined her, his voice low. Maybe it isn't meant to. They stood together beneath the falling water, their hands brushing, their hearts unguarded. Around them, the rain whispered over the rooftops, washing the soot from the town, from their skin, from everything that had been burned. The sound was neither sorrow nor triumph, but something gentler, a promise that even after fire, the world could still be made clean. He turned to her then, the faintest smile breaking through the weight he'd carried. You were right, he said. It wasn't fire that lasts. It's what survives it. She looked at him through the rain, eyes bright, voice barely more than breath. Then let's survive together. For the first time he allowed himself to believe it. Later, when the storm finally moved east and sunlight broke through the clouds, the people of Larkspur Crossing said they saw them standing by the forge, an Apache man and a settler woman, side by side beneath the rain. Some said it was love. Others said it was forgiveness. But those who saw closely, those who still remembered what it meant to hope, swore it was both. And if you listen closely when the summer rains return, you can still hear the echo of their hearts in the rhythm of the falling water, steady, patient, and alive. Because in the end, it wasn't the fire that defined them. It was the rain that refused to stop falling.